Welcome to the Dear Applicants podcast, where we dive into practical tips, insightful interviews, and explore personal stories that will hopefully inspire and motivate you to pursue your dreams and achieve your university admission goals. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dear Applicants. I'm your host, Jonathan, and joining me today is Rory, one of our Oxbridge strategists, mentors, and also a graduate of Balliol College, Oxford, where he read English language and literature. Very, very interesting individual. He was vice president of the college's undergraduate student body. And in that capacity, he basically oversaw administration of over 350 students. So he's not only, I guess we're very privileged to have him here today because he's not only someone that studied there, someone that's a mentor, but you also were pretty involved in student life. Especially overseeing new students who are coming onto campus, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first of all, thank you very much for joining us today. How are you?
Yes, very well. I just arrived in Singapore a few days ago as part of the beginning of an extensive kind of travel plan. And I'm loving it, and I'm very happy to be here. So thank you for having me.
Let's stick on the travel plan for a bit, because I mean we've spoken before the camera started rolling, and quite an interesting little trip you're doing. So, why? How'd you get it? What are you going to be doing?
Yeah, so there's a program at Balliol College called the Pathfinders Award Scheme, and it involves a project proposal that you submit to the college, and it could be anything. And there's two halves of it. You can apply for the Asia program or the US program with a research project, and this can be on anything. I had a friend last year who was doing it on Asian street food, and she was successful in her application, so she went around traveling and trying lots of different food. Mine's maybe a bit more academic focused. I'm a little bit more. As much as I'd love to be eating as much food as possible. My project was looking at the improvement of Chinese universities in the top 100 global rankings over the last decade. And you've kind of seen this trend of a lot of US and UK universities kind of stay in the top 100, but declined slightly, and at the same time Chinese universities have really shot up in the rankings, and this is for lots of different reasons, and it's been something that's very interesting to me. So my plan has been to travel to these universities, interview students and academics, and talk a little bit about this trend and their experience of studying in China.
And so you said that the trend was interesting to you, but apart from that, why Asia? Why China specifically?
I mean, I've always been very interested in Asia and Asian languages, the education system. I've been teaching myself Chinese for a number of years now.
You're pretty fluent, aren't you?
I mean, I wouldn't say fluent.
Well, I mean, at dinner last night, you were sounding off.
I mean, it's something that I really enjoy doing. I would say it's a hobby that I've very successfully managed to kind of monetize in a way, I suppose, for lack of a better word. But I've always just been really captivated by speaking other languages. In terms of Chinese specifically, it actually started with when I was 13 or 14, looking at Korean. This was when, Korean pop music was just starting to come up, and I was really interested in the language and the rhythm. And then through that, became kind of in touch with Chinese a little bit, and I found that there were lots of opportunities to practice. And as I learned more and more, I realized this was something that I could really build into my career. So I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near a point of fluency, but come September, I will be starting.
Sounded like it.
Well, there's lots of gaps, but come September, I'll be starting a master's degree at SOAS in London, studying Chinese studies for a year. So I'm very excited to begin that.
And when you say Chinese fits into your long-term career plans, what do those plans look like? Do you have an idea yet, or is it still a work in progress?
I mean, I'm very interested in education. I've worked as a teacher in several different capacities for 5 or 6 years now, and I'm very, very interested in the education system in China and in Singapore as well. And working with Asian students in general has just been such a pleasure of mine. So I'm really excited to expand on that and kind of develop my experience, my expertise in a more kind of general sense. Yeah.
And I guess languages is always, it's always good to speak multiple languages. I don't, but lots of people do. But it's not particularly typical for someone to pursue languages as an undergraduate degree, right? Or through their undergraduate degree. And of course, Chinese, Korean for you has always been an interest on the side that you have since weaved into your career pathways, but you studied English language and literature at university. I know that you've always been a humanities focused kid, but why the emphasis on English?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. Prior to studying English, I was very interested in studying law. That was something that I think law brings in lots of different aspects of sociology and philosophy. And I sort of transitioned to English just because I liked the all of the different areas that it touches. I really enjoy communication. Learning languages is a big part of that. Teaching is a big part of that. So English to me was the transition into something that I think allowed for more opportunities and something which also meant that, if you look at the hiring practices from corporate law firms, 50% of them hire from law degrees, undergraduate degrees, but then they also hire 50% from conversion courses. You have lots of students at my college who studied things like engineering, PPE, and now are on training contracts at top law firms. So English was something that I always really enjoyed. It was very modular and very varied in the different topics and kind of schools of thought that we were looking at university. So it was a great sort of transition for me personally.
Let's stay with the topic of law for just a second, because of course it's an incredibly popular course worldwide, especially so for students that are coming out of Singapore, right? And the UK is a very popular destination because most universities, degrees from most universities are recognized by the law council, but basically by the bar over here, although you have to take two parts of the bar and the nitty-gritties to it. But it's a more straightforward conversion than if you were to study law elsewhere, for example. But what a lot of students may not realize is that, especially if they want to stay on in the UK, taking that conversion course is an option, right? You don't necessarily have to go in for a BA in law if you have varied interests. And why do you think that is? That law firms in the UK are more, you're seeing them be more and more open to taking students from varied backgrounds?
Yeah, that's a interesting question.
And I don't expect you to answer that as a recruiter,
I can't speak
right?
for all of the corporate law firms, but I think that, and you see the same in lots of aspects of consulting and business. A lot of them hire from humanities subjects, and I do think it comes back to that idea of communication. As a lawyer, you're expected to work in big teams, small teams, varied teams. So they want people who are going to approach situations from different critical angles. And with humanities subjects, with STEM subjects as well, you are encouraged to think outside the box, approach situations and problems through your own critical kind of your own critical lens, and that's something that's really valued and I think becoming more valued in the corporate world. Obviously, having a strong foundational basis in the content and the theory of something like law, but then also how can you approach problem solving more kind of openly and more complexly than just here's a problem, here's the easiest solution, thinking about it in a more I'm lacking the word, thinking about it in a more holistic way. That's the word, yeah. Exactly.
To borrow a word from the US admissions officer.
Yeah.
But back to your personal journey, I guess you do buy into that philosophy, right, to a large extent, because you had pretty serious brushes with law in a professional sense in the past, and then ultimately chose to go the direction of English language and literature. What was that experience like working at or interning with a law firm? And you even shadowed a lawyer as well, right, at Crown Court?
Yes, yeah. When I was 14 or 15 years old, I was really becoming into it. And through my parents had worked, my mother, who's a social worker, had worked in various different courts. And through that, I was able to shadow a prosecutor. Which was, again, really interesting. I think in especially criminal law, although it's, you speak to lots of lawyers coming out, a lot of them are slightly staying away from criminal law just based on, in the UK, it's
Oh, no, tears. Well,
is it? Yeah.
Everyone goes into their law degree going, yes, I'm going to be a criminal lawyer.
Exactly.
And they come out of it very much a corporate.
Yes, yeah. But I think the pace of being in court, the real kind of tangible human quality of it was something, again, that was like really, really appealed to me. And then from that, I interned briefly at Freshfields, which is one of the Magic Circle firms, top 5 law firms operating in London. Which again, it was the pace of it, the communication, working in different teams. I was allocated to dispute resolution, which I think was again a very interesting. It's a slow burner, I suppose, in the sense that it's a lot of the projects last several years. But it was really interesting. And then most recently, my experience with that, with law in particular, was working as a paralegal in a criminal or a solicitor's firm. And that was working on a very big case. And it was just lots of different pieces of information that I had access to. I was listening to phone recordings. I can't speak very specifically about the case, but it was...
Is it over and done with now, or still dragging?
Yeah, it was actually a case of international banking fraud. I don't think I can say too much more than that. But the amount of content and resources and materials that we were working through was tremendous. So it was just really, really interesting to have that kind of that access, I suppose.
Before we continue, I would like to take a quick break to remind you to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps us improve and to reach a wider audience to provide further insight into this arduous journey. Also, if you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to email us at our email linked in the description below. We'd love to hear from you. And you were quite lucky to have these opportunities, to have a couple of internships, work at a law firm during your gap year. But do you feel as though internships are essential to somebody's applications? I think a lot of people see their applications timeline as one during which they just have to tick a bunch of things off a list, right? And internships very often tend to be one or two of those things. But you've done it. You've done these internships yourself. You've gone to Oxford. You've worked with new students coming in. Do you feel as though that's something that's essential or important at all? I
would stress that you are not disadvantaged by not having access to things with internships or connections. There's obviously a sense of kind of privilege with being able to access that, and I would say it can be helpful to get real tangible experience in that sense, but there are opportunities, and I'm sure we can talk about this later as well, in bolstering your application through things like essay programs, essay competitions, ways of developing that experience of kind of expanding your interest in different topics, thinking more critically about what you've looked at maybe in school or things that have come up that have interested you. I think that it's less about just internships and more about pushing what you've already come in contact with, pushing it a little bit further, challenging your own ideas and your own conceptions. And that's really what they want to see at places like Oxford and Cambridge. They're not just looking through for the word, I interned at. They're looking more for how you have developed your own critical understanding.
Right, so it's just the exploration of that particular field that you're interested in. And I mean, the websites say it themselves, right? That what they want to understand is, or what they want to see is your love for a particular subject, a passion for that particular field, not so much a laundry list of accolades and achievements. And I guess it's worth pointing out more so for our audience that the UCAS is undergoing a bit of a revamp, right? And for students who are going to be applying, not this year, but in the next couple of years, they're no longer going to have to write that standard, good old personal statement. But now the UCAS actually seems to be shifting more in the direction of the US, right? Where they're breaking the personal statement down into smaller short response questions or short response essays, where the focus is more on, what have you done to explore that subject? Not so much the have you done X, Y, or Z. It's, look, if you want to do law, tell us why. And tell us how you've explored that. So thank you for making that clear, right? That it's not so much the accolades. You're not looking for that particular term, but it's more the interest. And so what did actually, before we go to your personal statement, you took a gap year.
I did.
Why make that decision?
Just a variety of reasons. I really enjoyed studying and it was, I suppose, at a time where I was transitioning from law into more generally thinking about what I liked studying academically. And I just felt like I wanted to take some time to kind of reassess and have some real world experience. You know, my gap year gave me the opportunity to work as a paralegal.
Did you work as a paralegal for the entire year?
So but prior to, right at the beginning of my gap year, I was working in this solicitor's firm, just work experience, unpaid.
Okay.
And they.
But I mean, this is actual work, right? Not one of those internships where you just
no,
getting coffee.
I wasn't getting coffee. No, I was working on a case, and they liked me. So they then a month later, when they had this big case come in, they asked me if I'd like to come on board in a more official capacity. Okay. Then the case ended quite abruptly. Again, I wish I could speak about it, but
we'll wait for the camera to stop rolling.
Yeah. And then I actually transitioned into working as a primary school teacher, which was a complete change of pace, right? And this was as a teaching assistant with specifically with special needs students, which is something as well that I have lots of experience with. And you know, the opportunity of taking a gap year gave me that real sort of expanded experience, and I think that really helped me coming into university. A lot of people don't have the luxury of taking a gap year, or they really want to step into it the next stage of their educational journey. I think for me it was a great choice because it allowed me to explore what I wanted to do in the real world. And you know, there's always this joke of when we came into Oxford, the people who took gap years are kind of like, I'm a year older than you. I had a job. I had a P45, which is like a tax form for your wages. So there was a sense of you know, just having developed a bit more of yourself, I suppose, before coming in. Again, it's not something that I think is hugely beneficial on an application or at the detriment of an application to take a gap year. I was just someone who was lucky to be in a position to be able to do that.
Okay. And how helpful, so you did a lot of things during your gap year. How helpful were all those activities, all the experience that you gained during that 1 year, 2 year applications? Because your application would have actually gone in
beforehand.
Oh, so you had applied when you were
yes.
Okay, so you got your offer.
So I got my offer in, I believe, January of my gap year.
So before you finished, before you finished your A level.
So no, I initially applied for law during the standard
So when you
application cycle.
Year 13.
Yes,
right?
year 13. And then I actually withdrew my application because I realized I want to take a gap year. So then I reapplied the next year with English, and
so your application went in October, so only about 2 or 3 months into your gap year. Anyway.
Yeah, and that was nice to you know, in my gap year to wake up to an email that was, you know, well done, you've got an unconditional offer, and I could kind of rest easy. To have an unconditional offer as well was something that was so affirming and very just, you know, I didn't have to then think, oh, okay, right, I have to sit exams now, I have to get this certain grade boundary. I'd already got the results. So that was quite reassuring.
So I'm trying to see parallels between your own journey of taking a gap year and a lot of male students in Singapore who have to do national service. Now, of course, the two cases are not particularly alike. You made a decision to take a gap year over here. You have to do national service. And of course, during your gap year, you had the time to do things, right? So, for example, being a paralegal wouldn't have been possible if you had a 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 sitting in camp. But I'm sure that there were things you did outside of the hours of 9 to 6 or 9 to 7, things that you did by yourself in the evenings or on the weekends that nevertheless enhanced your own journey of growth and exploration. And I wonder if you can talk about some of those things that you did and things that Singaporean boys, men, who are 18, 19 now and are wondering, what can I do while I'm at NS? Is this just a black hole, right, in my life, or are there things that I can still do to help my profile? Because I'm not, well, we've had discussions about this, but the Singaporean guys over here have 3 attempts to apply, right?
Right.
For Oxbridge, of course, you typically only have 1 or 2 because you're only allowed to defer for a year.
Yeah.
But for the US, for example, you can apply in JC2 or 12th grade, like year 13 for you, and then your first and second years of national service. What are the kinds of things that they can get up to? feasibly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, as we kind of looked at earlier, Oxbridge specifically want to see your role as a critic approaching, and that's for humanities, that's for social sciences, that's for STEM as well. So I think when you have this, when you have a period of something like military service, or again, it crosses over with a gap year. I was reading as widely as possible, so I was looking at. I was looking at the course guideline, the course structure, and some of the recommended reading, kind of getting into that, and then trying to access different essays, looking at the references for that and the citations, and building on that a bit more. I think it's easy to see it as you said, a sort of black hole of time that is, you're spending doing something else, but you can use that time to build on your understanding and your knowledge. So reading, in my gap year in the evenings, I was using that time to improve my Chinese as well. Lots of revision and flashcards and things like that. So I think it comes back centrally to, on your personal statement when you're applying, they don't just want to see, I read this in school, this was what we were looking at, this was interesting to me. They want to see you say things like, in school I encountered, let's say for history, we were looking at this part of history. And this raised some interesting questions in my mind about the issues with how history is subjective, how we can't ever concretely think about making absolute assertions. And through issues of subjectivity, it led me to read this book, which made me think more deeply about this and the issues of my subject. So I think it's kind of using what you already know as a starting point, as a kind of basis, and then moving away from that and saying, it made me think about this differently. I then use that as an opportunity to read this and recontextualize my understanding. So yeah, I think using the time that you have, obviously, like you said, a gap year in military service is very different. You might not have as much time, but trying to use the time that you have to push your ideas and your personal interests into new areas to build on that.
That's all for today's episode of Dear Applicants. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you found the content valuable and insightful. If you'd like to learn more about our guests or the topics we discussed, be sure to check out our show notes for links and further resources.